Tom Harrison had always been the kind of man who took life one day at a time. A quiet man, he worked in a dull office, drove an even duller sedan, and spent his nights with a book or his favorite show. He had a life that felt a little too ordinary, but he liked it that way. Routine was comfortable. Until one evening, on a road he knew too well, everything went wrong. It happened on the stretch of highway that curved around the edge of the forest, just before the old iron bridge. Tom had driven it countless times, but this time something felt off. He was distracted, thinking about his long day at work and his plans for the evening, when the car suddenly jerked. It was subtle at first, a slight shudder that grew stronger, until the steering wheel yanked in his hands. He barely had time to react before the car skidded off the road, hitting a tree with a sickening crunch. Then nothing. Tom's eyes fluttered open. The first thing he noticed was the bright sunlight streaming through his window, the same view of his apartment complex that he'd seen 100 times before. He sat up in bed, his head pounding, as if he'd been knocked unconscious. He rubbed his temples, trying to clear the fog in his mind. Everything seemed normal. Too normal. He glanced at the clock. 8 a.m. Wait, 8 a.m.? The crash? Tom bolted upright, his heart hammering. He remembered the road, the car, the tree. But here he was, safe and sound in his apartment. Had it been a dream? Confused, he forced himself to go through his morning routine. Maybe it had just been some kind of weird nightmare. But as he made his coffee, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The unsettling sense that everything had happened before. The day passed without incident. Work was dull, just like any other day. Yet, a shadow hung over Tom, an undeniable dread that crept into his bones. He couldn't stop thinking about the crash. And then, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, the strangest thing happened. The clock on his wall flickered. Suddenly, he was back in the car again, the engine sputtering and the wheel pulling to the left. His stomach lurched as the car sped out of control, the trees rushing up to meet him. Before he could even scream, the world went black. The next time Tom woke up, it was 8 a.m. again. He was in his bed. Everything was as it had been. But this time, Tom knew. He knew it was coming. He knew what was going to happen. It wasn't a dream. It was a loop. Every night, the same crash, the same waking up. Again and again. At first, Tom tried everything. He swerved the car at the last second, tried pulling the emergency brake, even tried stopping the car completely. But no matter what he did, the crash always happened. And when he woke up, the day reset. His mind began to fray at the edges. Was this hell? A nightmare from which there was no escape? Or was something deeper at play? He couldn't be sure, but one thing was undeniable. Something wanted him to crash. It was on the 15th iteration. Tom had lost count of how many times he'd died. That he noticed something new. A figure standing at the side of the road. A man, dressed in a dark coat, his face hidden by the shadows of the trees. Tom tried to avoid him, but no matter how hard he swerved, no matter how much he tried to steer around the figure, the car would always veer into the same path and slam into the tree. The next time he woke up, Tom didn't follow his usual routine. He didn't make coffee or go to work. Instead, he set out to investigate. The road, the figure, the crash. There had to be some connection. He drove to the highway that afternoon, driving carefully, looking for the man, the figure he'd seen in the loop. But when he reached the stretch of road where the crash always happened, he found nothing. Only the usual empty stretch of pavement surrounded by dense trees. Still, something tugged at him. As he continued along, his eyes caught something out of place. A set of tire tracks in the dirt, leading off the road and into the woods. Tom followed the tracks, his heart pounding. The tracks led to an old, abandoned car, the rusted metal of the fender barely visible through the overgrowth. And then he saw it. A name, barely legible but unmistakable. Harrison. Tom's blood ran cold. He bent down to inspect it further, finding a cracked and broken brake line under the hood. Someone had sabotaged this car. A crash. A murder. And he was somehow tied to it. Tom started piecing things together. The man in the shadows, the one he kept seeing before each crash, wasn't just a figment of his imagination. He had been there that night, too, when the car had gone off the road. The man's face began to come into sharper focus. It was an older man, his eyes cold and full of malice. Tom knew him now, remembered him from his childhood. The name came to him in a flash. Victor Calloway. Victor was a man who had been involved in a terrible tragedy many years ago, a fatal car accident where someone died. Rumors had always swirled around the incident: sabotage, betrayal, and an unresolved mystery about the true cause of the crash. But nothing had ever been proven. Until now. Tom wasn't just reliving the crash. He was reliving the moment when Victor had murdered someone by intentionally tampering with the car's brakes. But what did Victor want? Why was Tom caught in this endless loop? The answer came in a chilling realization. Tom wasn't just witnessing the events of the crash. He was part of it. Somehow, his actions had caused the cycle to continue. He had to fix what had been broken. He had to stop Victor from killing that man before it was too late. But time was running out. The loop was growing more dangerous. The more Tom tried to intervene, the more Victor seemed to anticipate him, getting closer to his next victim. Tom knew what he had to do. The cycle wouldn't stop until Victor was stopped. The road, the crash, and the murder, it was all part of the same puzzle, and he had to put the pieces together. This time, when he reached the curve before the old bridge, he didn't wait for the crash to happen. He took matters into his own hands. He made a daring move, driving off the road and crashing into the trees, intentionally, in an effort to catch Victor before he could sabotage the car again. And as he did, time slowed. The moment stretched, the wind in his hair, the cold sweat on his skin, until, suddenly, the world snapped back into place. He wasn't in the car anymore. He was on the edge of the road, watching as the car swerved and crashed into the trees. Tom turned and saw Victor standing in the shadows, a twisted grin on his face. "You're too late," Victor said. But Tom wasn't finished. He had learned enough. He knew what he had to do to end this nightmare for good. The chase was on.